Imagine receiving a phone call from someone you loved, but who passed away years ago. Maria was sitting alone in her small, dimly lit apartment, scrolling through old photos of her mother. It had only been 2 months since her passing, and the weight of her grief still clung to her like a shadow. The nights were the worst, when silence stretched endlessly, amplifying the ache in her heart. That night, as she sat in the flickering glow of a single lamp, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number. Her fingers hovered hesitantly above the screen. Something deep inside her told her not to answer, but an unexplainable pull forced her to. Maria. The voice was soft, familiar, unmistakable. It was her mother. Her breath hitched. "Mom? Is that you?" "I'm fine, my love. Don't worry about me," the voice assured, but something about it was off. An echo lingered in the words, an unnatural distortion that sent shivers down her spine. Tears welled in Maria's eyes. She clutched the phone tighter. "Where are you? How is this even possible?" But before she could say another word, the line went dead. Maria stared at the screen, her hands trembling, her mind racing. Desperate for answers, she tried calling the number back, but it didn't exist. The following night, as the clock struck the same late hour, her phone buzzed again. The same number. This time, Maria's heart pounded louder than the ringtone. She let it ring, but it didn't matter. The calls kept coming, night after night, and when she finally stopped answering, the whispers began, even when the phone wasn't ringing. Have you ever felt someone watching you even when you're alone? This next story will make you question the safety of your own home. Tom was a night owl. He found comfort in the quiet hours, working late into the night in his cozy home office. The silence helped him think. The stillness sharpened his focus. But one night, that stillness became unbearable. As he typed away on his laptop, a chilling sensation crawled over him. It was the unmistakable feeling that someone was standing right behind him. He shook his head, brushing off the thought as paranoia. But then, something on his laptop screen caught his eye. In the screen's reflection, a shadowy figure stood in the corner of the room. Its shape was blurred but undeniable, tall, dark, and perfectly still. Tom's breath caught in his throat as he spun around. His heart raced, pounding like a drum in the silence. Trying to calm himself, he turned back to his work, but the unease lingered, gnawing at him. Every few minutes, he found himself glancing at the screen, and each time, the shadow was still there. The next night, he left the lights on, thinking it would chase away his fear, but it didn't. This time, the shadow wasn't just standing still. It moved. It stepped closer, slow and deliberate, its edges flickering like the dying flame of a candle. Tom's fear exploded into panic. He bolted from the room, abandoning his laptop, his work, everything. He never went back after dark. Even in the daylight, the room felt wrong. That corner seemed to watch him, waiting for the moment he'd return. And deep down, Tom knew it wasn't finished with him yet. What would you do if you heard screams coming from a room that no one could enter? Emma had been working as a night guard at the old hospital for 3 months. The pay was good, and the nights were quiet, until the night she heard the screams. It started like any other shift. She was making her usual rounds on the 3rd floor, a place no one visited anymore. The floor was abandoned, its hallways lined with rooms that had been empty for years. But one room was different, room 307. That door was always locked, and Emma had been warned never to go near it. She didn't ask questions. She just did her job. But as she passed by that night, a piercing scream shattered the silence. It was sharp, desperate, like someone was trapped inside, in unbearable pain. Emma froze, her flashlight trembling in her grip. The scream seemed to seep through the cracks of the door, echoing down the empty hall. She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. Against her better judgment, she stepped closer and tried the door. It didn't move. The handle wouldn't budge. "Hello?" she called out, her voice unsteady. Nothing. Just silence. The next morning, she reported the incident to her supervisor. His face paled as she spoke. "Room 307 has been sealed for decades," he said, his voice low and serious. "No one's been inside since the last patient. They didn't make it, and some say their spirit never left." From that day on, Emma refused to patrol the 3rd floor, but sometimes, late at night, as she sat in her office, she could still hear it. Faint cries echoing through the halls, calling out from room 307. And each time she heard them, she couldn't help but wonder what was still waiting behind that door. Would you pick up a stranger on a dark, lonely road? After hearing this story, you might never stop for anyone again. Jake loved taking long drives at night. The quiet roads, the cool breeze, and the stars above always brought him peace. But one fateful night, that peace was shattered forever. It was close to midnight when he saw her, a woman standing by the side of a deserted road, waving desperately. She wore a pale dress, thin and fragile, completely unsuited for the chilly night air. Jake hesitated for a moment, but compassion got the better of him. He pulled over and rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" he asked. She didn't speak, just nodded silently and slid into the back seat. As they drove, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She was eerily quiet, her gaze fixed out the window. He tried making small talk to break the tension, but she didn't answer. Not a single word. Glancing into the rearview mirror, Jake saw her face, expressionless, blank, almost lifeless. When they finally arrived at her destination, a small, shadowy house at the end of a lonely street, Jake turned to tell her they had arrived. But the back seat was empty. The car door hadn't opened. There was no sound, no movement. She was just gone. Confused and unnerved, Jake stepped out of the car and approached the house. His heart pounded as he knocked on the door. An elderly man answered, his face weary with age. Jake described the woman he had picked up, the pale dress, the haunting silence. The old man's face went pale. "That's my daughter," he said, his voice breaking. "She died on this road 5 years ago." Jake never took a night drive again. But sometimes, when he's alone, he wonders, did he really see her, or was she still waiting for her next ride? What if you went camping and stumbled upon a cabin that shouldn't exist? This story will make you think twice about exploring the unknown. Mark and his friends had planned a simple weekend getaway in the remote woods, a break from their busy lives. They had heard the stories, tales of the forest being haunted, but they laughed it off. Ghosts didn't scare them, until they found the cabin. It wasn't on any map. The trail they'd been following shouldn't have led there. Yet, in the middle of nowhere, it stood, an old rotting structure, its wooden walls sagging with age. "What's the harm in staying the night?" Alex suggested with a nervous grin. It was already late, and the group reluctantly agreed. The moment they stepped inside, an unnatural cold swept over them. The air was thick and musty, as if the place had been sealed for years. The fire they lit seemed almost alive, its crackles unnaturally loud, and outside the windows, shadows seemed to shift. But the real nightmare began when they decided to leave. The door wouldn't open. No matter how hard they pushed, pulled, or slammed against it, it stayed firmly shut. The cabin had trapped them. The hours crawled by as they tried everything to escape. Their fear grew with each passing moment, every creak of the wooden walls feeling like a warning. Finally, as the first rays of dawn filtered through the cracks, they managed to break the door down. Stumbling out into the clearing, they turned back. The cabin was gone. The spot where it had stood was now empty, as if the cabin had never existed. After that night, none of them ever returned to those woods. But they swore they saw it again, the same cabin appearing in different places, always vanishing when they got too close. Maybe it's still out there, waiting for its next visitors.